up by hello Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, welcome in one and all to another episode of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersections of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes. I'm Trey Reeves. I'm joined once again by Mitch Mason, our Big 12 czar this year, with all of the amazing research that he's done. It's been an amazing conference to cover. Today on the show, we are covering teams 6 through 10 in the listener-generated power rankings. If you missed the first episode back on Monday, do go back and listen to that if you're interested. Teams 11 through 16 were covered on there. Tons of fun storylines, Mitch, as we jump in. And we're going to talk about a lot more fun storylines today in this kind of meaty middle, as you described it on the last episode.
Yeah, man, I think the offenses are going to be fantastic. I think there's a chance that there's a few really good defenses on this list as well. And, you know, in a conference that we spent last episode talking about the Big 12 operating on the thinnest of margins, right? And you could conceivably make a case that a Houston or an Oklahoma State, a team that the Jimmies and the Joes picked at the very bottom of the conference, could make a run a la Arizona State, where we're not necessarily saying that they're going to make the playoff, but nobody sees them coming, right? And the team is much more than maybe the sum of all of its parts. I think in Houston's case, I think the Jimmies and the Joes maybe just a little bit asleep on the Cougars, and so we'll see what Willie Fritz gets out. But for the most part, these teams aren't going to catch anybody by surprise, I don't think. All of these teams, depending on who you talk to, have a chance at doing something special this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun to try and make sense of it here tonight.
Well, I'm excited to jump right in with you. Do want to pay some bills real quick before we get started. Make sure that you are checking out our sponsor, our title sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, and make sure that you don't forget about our other sponsor, Home Field Apparel as well. You can use the code 3TechPod at checkout to get 15% off your first order over at Home Field. With that, though, let's jump right into the first team that we're talking about tonight. Number 10 on the listener-generated power rankings, that's the TCU Horned Frogs. And Mitch, the Horned Frogs, we were starting to have some questions, and we really just wanted to see what a baseline year was for Sonny Dykes at TCU, because obviously a couple of years back they had the massive, amazing high of running to the playoffs. They followed that up with a 5-7 year where they were one of 4 teams to lose to Colorado. So that was kind of the dichotomy of TCU. They had a quiet bounce back season last year. It didn't start great. They started 3-3, and we were asking some real questions after they lost to UCF and Houston in that opening stretch of the season. But they finished 6-1. They do have they have a bona fide quarterback in Josh Hoover, who set a Horned Frog record with almost 3,950 passing yards last year. He was courted by Tennessee in the offseason in the wake of the Nico Yamaleava drama, but ultimately decided to stay with TCU, stick it out there. And now he's coming back to be the face of this offense that will look to have yet another solid season.
Yeah, I really am a big fan of Josh Hoover. You know, I wrote that the biggest advantage that Hoover could have this year is a competent running game. At times, TCU's offense was so one-dimensional last year, and while they had a bunch of tremendous pass catchers, and when the offense was flowing, Hoover was stacking up yards and racking up touchdowns. But in those losses to SMU and to Houston and to UCF, you go back and you look at the rushing totals in those losses, and the Horned Frogs just couldn't move the football on the ground. So I do think a big part of the cog, or a big cog in the wheel this year for TCU making a run at the Big 12 championship game again, is to balance out that rushing attack. They finished 112th in the country last year. They still found a way to have the 25th best scoring offense, the 8th best passing offense. So just some sort of progression to average on the ground would be a big win. Kavorian Barnes comes over from UTSA. He'll be an important piece back there. And it's interesting because TCU doesn't really have that one bell cow name, at least unless I'm missing something. And TCU fans, please write in if there's a guy that you believe is him heading into the season. Depending on where you look, you have different starters kind of listed. I've seen Trent Battle listed. I've seen Jeremy Payne listed to get the lead carries. I've seen Lindy's magazine has Nate Palmer, the true freshman, I believe, pegged to start. And then you've got Barnes, who comes over from UTSA. So I think at worst, you're going to have running back by committee, and hopefully those pieces together behind the offensive line really help this offense go. The pass catchers are the other storyline on the offense because you lost quite a bit of production from last year's team. But Eric McAllister is back, the Boise State transfer who came in last year, had over 700 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then another Idaho kid in Jordan Dwyer comes over from the Vandals. He had almost 1,200 yards receiving last year and 12 touchdowns. So I kind of joked that I didn't know that Sonny Dykes had a pipeline to the Potato State, but evidently TCU has got him hot and bothered up there in Idaho.
Hey, you got to get them from wherever you can, right? Wherever you can build those pipelines. We've seen it on the college football video game. We'll see it with TCU dipping into Idaho, I guess. But yeah, I'm excited about this offense. They do need to be just consistent on the ground, right? 114 yards per game on the ground is not going to cut it.
Good.
Got to just be consistent. Got to keep them honest with the run game. It was never the primary threat, but it was always a threat when they made that run to the playoff a couple years ago. The defense was a lot better last year. In 24, it really bottomed out, but against the pass last year, they were only allowed 185 yards per game. They got 3 starters back in that secondary. They brought in Elijah Jackson from Washington, a guy that was a 13-game starter on the team that made it all the way to the championship for Washington a couple years ago. So I'm really excited about that secondary. You've got Devin and Marquise Deal anchoring that defensive line. Could be one of the better defenses in the conference yet again.
And I wrote that Andy Avalos is a defensive genius, and very similar to Ryan Walters, leaving Purdue as a head coach and going to Washington to be a defensive coordinator. I feel like this is where Avalos really gets to shine. There are some guys that just are not the best head coaches, but boy, you plug them in on whichever side of the ball they specialize in, and they absolutely shine. And I think Avalos is in a fantastic spot here in Fort Worth with TCU. They were 103rd in total defense in 2023 in that just lost 5-7 campaign. They made the jump all the way to 45th last year under Andy's tutelage. So I feel really good about some of the new names that they brought in along that defensive line. Bud Clark is back in the secondary. TCU's a team that's hard to ignore when you're talking about programs that might be on the verge of kind of breaking through and making a run to 10-plus wins.
Yeah, I think when you look at how our listeners ranked them coming in at number 10, it might feel a little disrespectful. But then you look at the schedule,
Sure.
And I'm a little bit concerned about just how difficult it is. It's probably the toughest schedule in the entire conference, just from top to bottom. 2 Power 4 games in the non-conference. They go to North Carolina. Again, we have no idea what the Fighting Bill Belichicks are going to be this year, but got some interesting pieces there. They host SMU in the final skillet game for the foreseeable future. That one's going to just boil over with a lot of hate. We, of course, saw Sonny Dykes get ejected in that game last year over in Dallas. So I'm really interested to see what the final iteration of that game brings. Then you get to the conference schedule, and they don't miss very many contenders. They do somehow don't play Tech. That's just a gross oversight from the Big 12 schedule makers. So I don't know who needs to be fired from that for not making that happen, but someone does. But as for the contenders, they go to Arizona State and Kansas State. Those are both probably the two of, if not the toughest places to play, factoring in team and crowd. And then they host Baylor and Iowa State at home. So that's just 4 games right there that you're probably looking at hoping you go 2-2. So not knowing how they're going to do in that non-conference schedule, having that tough slate and not missing very many contenders, I don't want to say this, but when you don't have everything clicking on offense, when you feel one-dimensional on offense until proven otherwise, that's when things could start to spiral out of control if you're not careful, in my mind.
Yeah, not getting out to a hot start would be tough. Would be tough to recover from, because you need some sort of momentum. You need to know what you're going to lean on as conference play gets started. 3 of your first 4 teams are against some of the betting favorites to make it to Arlington and win the conference outright. So not a soft start to the schedule. SMU's replacing quite a bit, and TCU has had SMU's number over the last several years. Last year was quite a different story, but this is also a different SMU team, as we'll talk about in the ACC preview next week as well. So I think that one is more wide open than what maybe the casual fan might kind of guess off the rip. If TCU can survive the first 6-7 games at West Virginia, then you play Iowa State, probably a loss, although it's at home in Fort Worth, at BYU, at Houston, home against Cincinnati. There is an objective easing up in the second half of the schedule. It's not much. I think we like a number of those teams on that list. We have not talked about BYU yet. We have not talked about Iowa State yet. So there's a lot still at play, but nobody saw TCU coming a couple of years ago either when they made that run to the national championship. And so I think I don't believe that it was just a complete accident that Sonny Dykes got TCU there. I think he found what was working in year one, and they ran with it, and they played really good defense, and they took some people by surprise. There are hints and whiffs of those ingredients once again. And so if the defense continues to progress and that offense is a little bit more balanced, I think TCU will have a case to certainly compete in a number of those conference games and maybe win them outright.
Well, they're another team, too, that I just like the most important pieces. I like the quarterback. I like the defensive line. I like the pass rush. I like the offensive line. Had some hiccups at times. They struggled in the run game, but they were really good at pass blocking. They kept Josh Hoover on his feet more often than not last year. So, yeah, I think this is a team that has some really good pieces and will probably finish higher than the 10th that our listeners have them. Let's talk about a team that is going through a massive transition once again. We'll go up to Boulder, Colorado, and talk about Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. They had a high watermark last year, 9-4, 7-2 in league play. But pretty much all of the pieces that made that possible are gone. Of course, the Sanders brothers, the Heisman Trophy winner, just little pieces, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
Just little things that they're going to have to replace. The story of this team this year is really interesting. It starts with the quarterback position. Who's going to replace Shedeur Sanders? In my mind, until I started doing research for this show, I was just assuming that they brought Caden Salter in to be the starter. And then I opened up my Phil Steele magazine, and I see true freshman Julian Lewis listed as the primary option. So it seems like it is going to be a battle between those two. And obviously, Salter is the veteran. We've seen what he can do at Liberty. And Julian Lewis is the talented but complete unknown true freshman 5-star.
Yeah, so first let me start with the offensive line, because that was the story for Colorado the last 2 years, right? And even with Shedeur back there, who objectively was a good quarterback for Colorado, right? I mean, as much as the jokes wrote themselves about Shedeur, mostly for his off-the-field antics, he was extremely accurate with the football and made a lot of big-time plays that kept them in games, right? I mean, Baylor is probably playing for a Big 12 championship had Colorado not completed that Hail Mary and then beaten Baylor in overtime at home. There were just plays that Shedeur made that gave Colorado a chance to be right there in the thick of it down the stretch themselves and compete for a Big 12 championship. So you're replacing, 75%, I think 74 maybe to be precise, percent completion when it comes to the quarterback. And I think whoever does win that battle, Salter or Juju Lewis, the offensive line is going to be a big part in how they protect him. You do return both tackles in Jordan Seaton and Phillip Houston. I do like the guards. You've got some names that you've probably heard of on the interior of that offensive line, but it has taken Colorado time to get those 5 players to gel over the last 2 years. So that's storyline number one. Now, to the quarterback play, I think it's going to be Caden Salter that starts the season, but I'm concerned that it's not for very long. Salter at his best at Liberty was when he was able to chuck the ball downfield and get those big over-the-top plays. I think he's going to have access to that with a whole new wide receiver core at Colorado. You've got Omarion Miller comes over from Penn State. Draylon Miller is back, former blue chip recruit. And then you bring in Joseph Williams, who's a kid that I don't think most college football fans will know of. He absolutely burst onto the scene last year as a true freshman at Tulsa and transferred up to Colorado in the offseason. I think he's I want to say he's a McKinney product, something like that. North Texas kid. Actually got to call one of his games. Very fun talent. So I think the weapons for Colorado are going to be there. At the running back position, they've got maybe an approach by committee there. Micah Welch is listed as the starter in a couple of places that you might look. To be honest, I don't know a ton about what I'm going to count on from him this season. But if Salter has struggles early, and if he isn't the quarterback that led Liberty to the Fiesta Bowl, the backup quarterback is the most popular player on campus. We know this, and especially when it's a 5-star true freshman whom you flipped from USC, I do wonder how fast those calls for Lewis and a new era at quarterback, a longer era at quarterback to begin, I wonder how loud they get.
The other thing that I think is going to go against Caden Salter is just the lack of any discernible run game. You mentioned how often Shadur was running for his life with this offensive line, but even more so, it was just it was abysmal for opening up holes for the run game. They've yet to average more than 70 yards per game on the ground. In the 2 seasons under Deion Sanders, they have not averaged more than 70 yards per game on the ground. So
and that was
that's the sacks.
That was with Dylan Edwards as RB1 in year one. You're right, though, about the sacks.
Yeah, I mean, part of that's the sacks. They've allowed 99 sacks in those 2 years. That's going to offset a lot of your rushing numbers. But they really also haven't tried to run the ball because it hasn't been working. They've had just 222 running back attempts last year. That's really, really low when you think about it in the context of what other teams are doing around the country. They're just not able to establish the run game. So Caden Salter has not had that problem in his college career at Liberty. He's been able to have a running game to rely on. He's been able to use his legs a lot. Could be something where Juju Lewis needs to come in and provide a spark. Switching over to the defensive side of the ball, they improved greatly last year. Their defense was a laughingstock in 2023. Last year, they improved by over 100 yards a game. I'm optimistic about the D-line. I love Tavian Coleman, who's coming up from Texas State. I thought that was a fantastic transfer pickup. They're getting some guys that were kind of all conference level players in the G5 to come in and play linebacker. So trying to see if they can get up and getting some starters from G5 programs as well in the secondary. So Colorado, I don't know is ever going to be known for defense, but they improved last year and they brought in some really nice pieces. So I don't think they're probably be far closer to 2024 than they were 2023 in my mind.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, did you mention Martavius French?
I did not. No, that's another one.
Yeah. UTSA linebacker that comes over. He's one of my personal favorite additions. Preston Hodge is back. I want to say he was a former Liberty transfer from 2 seasons ago. DJ McKinney, Oklahoma State transfer up to Colorado last year. He's back at cornerback. They add Makari Vickers from Oklahoma to try and replace Travis Hunter as well. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of fun pieces to like on the defensive side. One note before we get to the schedule, Omarion Miller did not transfer from Penn State. That didn't sound right, and so I went and checked my note, and that's not true. He was limited to 6 or 7 games, I want to say, last year due to injury. They did get Hakeem Williams, former 5-star transfer from Florida State. So that's another new name to know in the wide receiver core. So, yeah, I mean, typical new faces, who's going to be the guy that steps up narrative on offense.
Well, let's get into that schedule. It's tricky, put it lightly. They open with Georgia Tech at home. I think that has the potential to be a lot of points on a Friday night and opening weekend.
Yeah.
Can't wait for that game and the Baylor-Auburn game to be going on at the same time on that opening Friday night. Like, just can't ask for more than that. Then the G5 games are tricky in my mind. Delaware, I'm really high on Delaware coming up from the FCS level. I
are.
like the talent that the Blue Hens have. Obviously, Colorado will be more talented. And then Wyoming's just always a really annoying team to play. Like, they're going to ugly up that game. They're going to be really committed on the defensive side of the ball and play really sound defense and just make things really hard for you. And you know those kids in that part of the country want to beat the biggest school in that part of the country. So just tricky. I'm not predicting Colorado to lose to Delaware or Wyoming, but it's just trickier than it might be. Kind of similar to them playing North Dakota State last year. And I think that ended up being a game that came down to the last play on opening night. So, yeah, tricky games there. You get into the conference schedule, though. They go to Houston. That's a game I circled on Houston's schedule as a big opportunity for them when we talked about them on Monday. They have Iowa State at home. They go to Utah. That place has been really difficult for the Buffs to win in Pac-12 play. And they close the season hosting Arizona State and going to Manhattan in back-to-back weeks. It's just a brutal schedule that doesn't really leave a lot of time to work out kinks, especially if you factor in that there might be a quarterback change coming at some point.
Yeah, and I wrote, I think the ceiling for Colorado, and it's a 6.5 over under, which I'll be honest feels a little high to me. I'm not entirely sure why Colorado is getting the benefit of the doubt from the bettors or to get it up to 6.5. Now on your graphic, the under bettors have that money right now quite comfortably. I think 6-6 and going to the Rate Bowl or the Independence Bowl would be a fine season, to be quite honest. And that may come off as Colorado slander to some. Apologies if that's the way you take it, but it's an objectively difficult schedule. And if you're talking about you have to beat Houston, you have to find a way to beat BYU at home. You probably need to pick off Arizona at home. And then, Morgantown, we don't really know what to expect in year one at West Virginia. But
that's crossing 2 time zones.
That's a long road trip and, normally a difficult place to play. So the deck, I feel like, is stacked against Colorado. And again, especially if the calls for QB2 start to grow louder, I wonder at what point Dion and company go, okay, let's see what the kid has. Let's see what the ceiling is under Juju, and let's figure out what we have for 2026.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the schedule, anytime there's 4 should wins, like you're starting with just 4, I think, should wins, that's going to make it hard to get to 6. I mean, it's hard to pick them on the road. It's hard to pick them without knowing who the quarterback is going to be and how consistent that's going to be. So, yeah, 6-6 is not slander. I think 6-6 would be a really solid step forward in a year with this much transition. Colorado fans, I know you're passionate about your team. Bandwagon Colorado fans, I know you're even more passionate about your team. So, just settle down and know that there's going to be a lot of potential for the future, especially if they can get some of these younger guys up and running and you see promise for those future years.
Do you think that the bandwagon for Colorado shrinks noticeably this year with Travis Hunter gone and the brothers Sanders out?
I mean, there is some of that mystique with it being a family affair. Like, I do think that was part of it, but most of it's coming from Prime, right? Yeah. Like, most of that's coming from Dion himself, I think. Sure. I think the players will change, but I think the true bandwagon that you see building is because of how boisterous Prime is and the people that are just really attracted to that mindset that he has. It's infectious personality. It's a really fun personality to follow, and I think that people will like that regardless of who's on the field.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. All right, next team on our list coming into, as we count down, at number 8. It's a team that was really disappointing last year. A lot of people were picking the Utah Utes to get to Arlington. A lot of people just assumed that they would continue the run of success that they had in the Pac-12. What they did not count on was Cam Rising missing even more time after we were just assured that everything was fine and everything was going to be great and he was going to come right into the Big 12. But this year is going to be different. They finished 5-7 last year, 2-7 in Big 12 play. This year's going to be different because they are completely overhauling the offensive skill positions. They go get Devin Dampier from New Mexico, and Devin Dampier is the best quarterback you've never heard of if you don't watch Mountain West football, because he was absolutely electric. He almost not single-handedly, but pretty much single-handedly almost got New Mexico to a bowl game last year at 5-7 before Bronco Mendenhall went off to return home. 31 total touchdowns last year at New Mexico. They bring up his offensive coordinator,
Jason Beck.
Jason Beck, thank you. Yeah, Jason Beck, and the wide receiver Ryan Davis from New Mexico as well. So they're really trying to capture that magic that they had in Albuquerque last year. It's an offense that a lot of people are buying into. I think the only question that I have is, can Devin Dampier just take care of the football? I think a lot of that last year was him trying to force things and force balls into windows that he shouldn't have. But he can rely on his running game. He can rely on his receivers a lot more here. He probably won't be running for his life as often behind this Utah offensive line that I think is going to be a strength.
Yes, absolutely should be five. I believe all 5 starters.
All 5 are back. Yeah.
Are back. So yeah, Dampier should have the Great Wall of Utah in front of him. I wrote that it's Operation Lobo to save the offense, bringing over Dampier and Beck and Davis. They go get Wayshawn Parker, who had a nice freshman season up on the Palouse for Washington State. And then they bring in a thumper, kind of the thunder to Parker's lightning from Utah State as well. So the rushing attack, the overall athleticism for this Utah team, it has me buying in. It has me growing more and more confident that Utah can get back to what we expected them to do last year. Utah started 3-0 while Cam Rising was healthy, and then he breaks his hand, or I've forgotten exactly what happened, but in that game against Baylor, and is never to be seen again. Medically retires after the season, and that's all she wrote. The Cam Rising saga just kind of comes maybe to its most poetic end, which was tough after just a tremendous career that he had and getting them to the Rose Bowl and all the great things that he did for that program. The defense on the other side, Trey, despite going 5-7 and literally losing all 7 games in a row, they started 4-0. They did win that Oklahoma State game, and then they lose 7 in a row before finally beating UCF. Still had a top 30 defense. I mean, Morgan Scalley is a defensive genius. He's head coach in waiting. We don't know exactly when Kyle Whittingham is going to retire, but I did write, if Utah has a nice season and it feels like a good transition period, they get to 9 wins, maybe they get to 10 wins, who knows? Then I feel like that's when Scalley's able to take over the reins from Whittingham. You can retire Kyle, a legend, and this program moves forward under a new regime. But until then, Morgan's just going to keep calling top 30 defenses. And I think there's a really good chance that they're even better this year. Certainly shouldn't be any different. The front 4 is maybe the one position group that needs to get their feet under them early. They've got Logan Fano back at edge. But other than that, they're a little bit inexperienced up at the front. The linebackers, they get some nice pieces back. Levani Damuni comes back from an injury that cost him almost all of 2024. And then in the secondary, they've got some new faces, some new starters at least, but Elijah Davis, Smith Snowden are going to be the names to know at corner. And then Tal Johnson is one of the best safeties that maybe you've never heard of as well.
Yeah, Tal Johnson is an awesome player. You mentioned the D-line being maybe the biggest question mark on the defense. I'm honestly fine with that because I think we can set our watch by Utah having at least a serviceable defensive line at this point. I trust that staff to get it done on the defensive line. And yeah, that defense was a thing of beauty to watch. There was nothing going right on the offensive side of the ball for large stretches last year. I think I'm high on Utah, and I think the betting market is surprisingly high on Utah. If you look at the graphic that we have on the screen right now, if you're watching on YouTube, the over under 7.5, but the over is the overwhelming betting favorite at -170. The title odds is what surprised me. You might look at +600 and not think that that's much, but in the context of the Big 12, that's tied for the second best odds to win the Big 12 behind just Kansas. I think Kansas State is at +550 as the odds-on favorite on FanDuel right now.
Kansas State is the best?
That's what I saw today when I was making these graphics.
Interesting.
So
okay.
It's an interesting betting market, but there's like 5 or 6 teams between +550 and +800. I think like they're all bunched up there together at the top. Okay. So it's not like that much breathing room there. The schedule's interesting to me as we transition to talking about how many games Utah can actually win this year. I'm fascinated by the opener at UCLA. It's going to be a late night kick, 11 o'clock Eastern on Fox. So we'll be watching that one as we record our week 1 live show, most likely.
Yep.
And I'm really interested to see how that one plays out at UCLA. It feels like a big game for the trajectory of both of those programs in 2025. I mentioned Wyoming being plucky for Colorado. It's even pluckier if you have to go to Laramie. That is not a fun place to play historically for power conference teams. Highest elevation in college football, so that's always interesting. Probably a little easier to adjust from boys from Salt Lake City. But the conference play opens brutally. In their first 3 weeks, or first 4 even, their first 4 games are Texas Tech, at West Virginia, back home against Arizona State, and then the Holy War at BYU. After that, it kind of softens up a little bit. They do host Kansas State later in the year and go to Baylor, but those first 4 are going to tell us a lot about if Utah is going to actually compete for anything of relevance in the Big 12 or if they're going to just be fighting for a bowl game.
And I love that we're at, what is it? What is Utah ranked? 8? Is that right? 8 in the rankings?
Yes. Yeah.
So I love that we're at 8 and we're like, well, Utah could win 3 out of these 4 pivotal games and we'll see in Arlington, and they'd be a favorite to win the Big 12 championship game. They could also go 6-6 if it doesn't go their way. Like, this is the beauty of the Big 12, and it's what makes pontificating about it so much fun and such a challenge as well, because inevitably we are going to have the icest cold takes when it comes to this conference, just because you either have to commit to something or you ride the fence. And obviously in the first episode, we did a lot of fence sitting, mostly because of the new transfers, right? Oklahoma State has 62 new faces on board. I don't really know what to tell you about what they're going to do when it comes to their season schedule. Utah, though, similar to, I think, my thoughts on TCU, if the offense can click, and I think if they can have a nice balance between the passing and the running game, this is a physical team. And you know the defense is going to be hell on wheels for a lot of these other conference opponents. Utah is one of those teams in the Big 12 that no matter if they're up or down, I feel like they're going to be the team you do not want to see on your schedule. You are thanking the league office in Las Colinas, Texas, when Utah does not appear on your team's schedule. And so as difficult as it is with the contenders, the other contenders that they end up playing, they do get Texas Tech at home. They do get Arizona State at home. They get Kansas State at home. Getting some of those big boys within the friendly confines, you flip it around on these other teams' schedules, who a lot of them we have yet to talk about, and we'll talk about in the third episode on Friday. Utah becomes one of those 2 or 3 games that you pencil in as must wins if they're going to be the conference champion, right? And so I think that's a huge vote of confidence for what the Utes will bring to this season. And, you know, I don't know exactly how it's going to shake out, but boy, it's going to be a whole lot of fun to watch.
The other thing, last thing I'll say on Utah, that I love to look at record in close games as a potential indicator of, hey, if we just fix 1 or 2 things. Utah was 1-5 in 1 possession games last year. So that is trending up for me. And most of those were just because the offense could not put points on the board. They put up 19 against Arizona State on the road, lost by 8. They put up 7 against TCU, lost by 6. Put up 14 at Houston, lost by 3. Yeah. I can keep going. Lost by 1 against BYU in a game that they've only put up 21. So you can really paint the picture pretty easily of Devin Dampier and the rest of that Lobo inflection coming in and making a case to make that offense a lot better and flip some of these games. So I'm excited. I think the Big 12 is going to be more fun if Utah is relevant in the conference discussion, because such a cool place to play, such a cool scene up there in Salt Lake City for the Utes. Let's go to a team that we were high on going into last year. And I'm going to say this right now. I love our Jimmies and Joes. I love each and every one of you. If you're listening to my voice right now, know that I love you and I respect you and I think you're amazing. And I hope that you stay as long as we have this podcast. I think you got your Arizona teams confused, some of you, when you were making these rankings, because I'm just not sure how Arizona got all the way up to number 7 in these rankings with the season that they had last year. I mean, it's right there on the graphic if you're watching on YouTube. 4-8 overall, 2-7 in conference play. and that was with Teteroa McMillan at wide out, and now he's gone. He's the best wide receiver in Arizona history. He's now gone, and they have to try to replace him. I don't see it. You did deeper research on the Wildcats than I did. They finished 7th or higher, unless outside of such a massive miss like Arizona State was last year.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm willing to go that high. I did have Arizona lower on this list. I think I would have been comfortable talking about them in our first episode. No disrespect to Bear Down Nation, because I think this Arizona team actually has the chance to be really good. So let me paint the optimistic picture for you. If you listen to Brent Brennan talk at Big 12 Media Days, he talked about the timeline last year was so not ideal that it just set the whole program kind of on a track for disaster, right? He gets brought in late after Jed Fish goes up to Washington. He's got to figure out who is actually staying and who's transferring out. And it was a lot of guys that transferred out. So he had to make the most out of not a lot of pieces. He brought a lot of guys with him from San Jose State, and that gamble didn't necessarily pay off in the way that I think he was hoping to in year one. Noah Fifita also turned the ball over quite a bit last year. We did not get vintage Noah Fifita, certainly not the version of him that we saw in 2023. So what do? They bring in offensive coordinator Seth Dagey from Marshall, who just got done winning a conference championship in the Sun Belt from Texas Tech, former gunslinger at Texas Tech. So you know that this offense is going to be air raid style. We're going to be spreading the ball all over the yard. So Teteroa McMillan is out in Carolina now playing for the Panthers. Who's he throwing to? We got a number of talented kids that I think you're going to recognize their name. Chris Houston from Wazoo, leading receiver for Washington State last year. Luke Weissong. Talk about one of the guys from New Mexico that did not go to Utah. Weissong was one of their best gadget players last year, a kid that was incredible out of the slot. He's in Arizona now. And then you've got Ishmael Mahadi from Texas State, who is a 5'0" bowling ball of just belief and electricity. He's going to be leading the Arizona backfield. All of that joins Chris Hunter III, who I think really established himself as the next wide receiver one, even in the shadow of Teteroa McMillan. So there's a lot of all-purpose yards. There's a lot of explosion joining the team this year, I think, for Arizona. And that's reason to believe in the Wildcats for 2025. The defense, it's a new look defense. Outside of the secondary, who they did lose to Cario Davis to Washington, I do wonder where they're going to get improvement from. This was a defense that was pretty bad last year, 108th in scoring, 105th overall. So you could look at it one of two ways. The new faces are good, fresh blood, chance to wipe the slate clean and go again. The other side of that coin is no continuity. You're starting from scratch again. How do you find those improvements? So they do have a lot of experience, though, in the secondary. I mentioned Takario Davis is gone, but they have Trident Stukes, who's back, 6th year on campus. Not one of the 8-year seniors on the all-geezer team from the Athletic, but he's getting close. Trey Smith is back after following Brennan from San Jose State last season. And then they bring in a transfer like Tia Sevilla from Texas, who will join the trenches. So there are some pieces to like on the defensive side. The defense is my main reason that I would have had Arizona a little bit lower on this list, but the offense in a league that loves to sling the rock is also the reason that I could see Jimmy's and Joe's saying, no, this is a dark horse contender.
I do love that Brent Brennan saw the issues on both sides of the ball and took action. Yeah. I think way too often coaches stand pat with their coordinators even after a bad year one, but Brent Brennan stepped in and said, no, like neither side of the ball was acceptable last year with the talent that we had. So yeah, I like the Seth Dagey hire. I think that that's going to be really fun, probably maximize Noah Fifita's skill set a little bit more. Sure. Danny Gonzalez, former New Mexico head coach. Yeah. I think that's a pretty good hire as well. Obviously New Mexico is a tough place to play and he wasn't long for that job in Albuquerque, but yeah, I think that that's going to be, can't really go anywhere but up based on what the defense was last year. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be something that they are as embarrassed by this season. Looking at their schedule as we transition into the over-under portion, 5.5 classic Big 12 over-under. And just to make it go even further, it's dead even, minus 110 on the over and the under.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows, Vegas included, what this is going to be. So, they play New Mexico, ironically, in their opener. They have a non-conference game at Kansas State.
Wait, no, they played New Mexico last year in their opener. They opened with Hawaii this year.
I'm looking at the 2024 schedule. My apologies. They do open with Hawaii. Thank you. They do have another non-conference game against Kansas State this year. It's at home on a Friday night once again. So that'll be interesting, but not relevant to the conference standings. Then they open at Iowa State in the actual conference portion of the schedule, and they have close at Arizona State in the Territorial Cup. So they miss a couple of the bigger players. They don't play Kansas State in a conference game. They kind of get to dip their toe in the water with a contender right off the bat, but not have it hurt their conference record. They do play Baylor, but it's at home. They play Kansas at home. And their road games aren't too difficult other than Iowa State. They go to Houston. I think that's going to be a must-win for both of these teams. The winner is going to feel like they can make a bowl game. The loser's probably not going to make a bowl game. And then they also go to Cincinnati, who in another spot, probably just like that Houston game. 5.5 is a really good line, man. I look at the schedule and a little bit of the unknowns on both sides of the ball. I think I get to 5 and 7 when I'm doing the back of the napkin math here, but it could just be 1 or 2 bounces of the ball away from being back in bowl season.
Yeah, agreed. And, to be able to come back to this episode, this week of content, come late December and compare the results and get to see the finished product is truly going to be like, we might have to do an episode on it because, it's truly, we're trying to paint by numbers and there are no numbers right now.
Right.
So that's fun as hosts and analysts. I think that 6 and 6 is the ceiling this year. I think that's the close could be really brutal. Kansas at Cincinnati, Baylor at Arizona State. Like you could talk me into 0 and 4 pretty easily there, depending on what the defense looks like. So I think this team's got to find a way to get rolling early. Obviously, you have to go 2 and 1 in non-conference play, and then it's going to come down to probably a bunch of shootouts, right? I mean, if Oklahoma State can get their offense up and running, it's probably going to come down to a shootout against the Pokes at home. You probably have to find a way to outgun Houston on the road, like you said. You're going to have to do it in Colorado at altitude. And those are the games that, I pick Arizona probably against Colorado because I'm higher on their offense than I am the Buffs. But that's the coin flip. Like, all right, which offense do I think could score 55 in a heartbeat? Like, that's kind of my rubric at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you can put up a Sammy Hagar, you're doing a pretty good job on offense. So, shout out to fellow non-80s kids. Listen to that. But let's close things out on the meaty middle portion of the Big 12 preview with a team that came in second in the conference last year, came up just short in the championship game, but had their first double-digit win season in school history this year. That's the Iowa State Cyclones. Checking in at number 6 on our listener rankings. This team brings back a lot from that team that was historic for the program last year. Rocco Beck, of course, is one of the nation's best at quarterback. Enters his junior season ready to make another run to the conference title. Top 2 running backs are back. They'd lost 2,000-yard receivers. That's going to be a big question mark, is who steps up in that receiving game. But the defense is bringing a lot of talent back, too. They were nasty against the pass last year, 166 yards per game allowed through the air. They bring back Jontez Williams and Jeremiah Cooper in the secondary. They were little susceptible against the run. They had some big games, 5 games where they gave up over 200 yards last year. But the linebacker core is going to bring a lot of guys back from injury. So 6 feels about like the floor for Iowa State this year to me. That's where they check in on these rankings. I feel like we'll probably see them a little bit higher in the final season standings.
Yeah, and I wrote that I think Iowa State gets out to a relatively hot start. I mean, we'll talk about Kansas State obviously in the next episode. Spoiler if you haven't been paying attention, but I think that game in Dublin, the Aer Lingus Classic, we get Farmageddon. I think that's a coin flip. I truly do.
Who's favored in that game? Because we need to just pick the underdog at this point. Every year it feels like.
I'm betting Kansas State.
I bet Kansas
favored.
State. Yeah, I bet Kansas State is favored, and
So
that's not been very good for the team that's favored in Dublin.
Yeah, this might be a comfy spot then for Campbell and the Cyclones. I do. Rocco Becht was not a happy surprise, but I think the way that he stepped into the starting role in the wake of the gambling scandal and Hunter Deckers, right? That was the former quarterback. When Deckers was ousted, it just left a huge void at QB1, and it felt like Iowa State had just lost its identity, and who knew what we were going to expect from the Cyclones. And he stepped in and has performed admirably, and he now is Iowa State football. Certainly one of the best quarterbacks to ever go through Ames, which is exciting. You mentioned the running backs. They've got Carson Hansen and Abu Salma III that are both back. Xavier Townsend is the UCF transfer, and then Chase Sowell is the ECU transfer, and they're going to try and step in and replace Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, the 2,000-yard receivers you mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of past production from a wide receiver standpoint that they've got to replace, but I do like what they did in the portal. The offensive line returns 4 or 5 starters, so I think that's going to be pretty stout. I think this offense is going to be as consistent as we've seen it. It was not a super flashy offense last year, 41st in scoring, 39th in total offense, but they got the job done, and they cruised to an 11-3 victory. You know, the defense and stopping the run for me becomes the key. If they were able to stop the run in that sloppy game against Texas Tech, you know, there wouldn't have been the drama at the end of the year that we had with whether or not Iowa State was going to get to Arlington. If you're able to stop the run, Cam Scatterbo probably does not do inhumane things to your linebackers and safeties, right?
Yeah.
So they've got to take that step forward in physicality. You know, I hate the 3-3-5. Any team that cannot stop the run, their fan base hates the 3-3-5. I don't know if it's built to. You have to have a very specific recipe to be great at pass defense, which they have been, and also be able to take away those 5 and 6 yard totes on the ground. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that this year or not. Tyler Odium left. They've got Dominique Orange, who's going to step up and be the nose tackle go-to once again. But the front 6, I guess, in that 3-3-5 scheme is the biggest question that I have for the Cyclones. And their level of play, to me, determines whether or not they get back to 10-plus wins or not.
I think the optimistic view of that front 6 is the linebacker core was just decimated with injuries last year. They were churning through guys. And if you're going to play a scheme where 3 linebackers are on the field, you're going to be more exposed easily if your top 3 or 4 or even 5 at times are out with injuries.
Yeah.
The bright side of that is they're bringing back a ton of guys that got experience last year. There's going to be a ton of experience in that room. They now all of a sudden, because they were so injured last year, now have depth and experience depth in that room. So that's the optimistic view if you're looking for a rosy picture of Iowa State's ability to stop the run. But it was bad last year. It was, like I said, 5 games where they gave up over 200 yards, 2 games where they gave up over 300 on the ground. Just not going to be winning football.
And they won one of them. They
did. It took a Herculean effort from Rocco Becht to grasp victory from the jaws of defeat in that game. I need to go back and find like the post-game win expectancy that Bill Connolly always puts out for that, because I'm sure all the stats said, yeah, UCF by 30 in this game.
Well, I believe that was the weekend that I was at a wedding in Des Moines, and so we only had so many phones at the table, and I was sitting at a table full of Hawkeye fans, so we're watching Iowa. But every time Iowa State initially did something terrible, like gave up a big run, half the reception groaned because there were so many Iowa State fans. And then as they started to come back, that side of the room got louder and louder and louder. It ended up being a really funny dichotomy because Iowa had a frustrating loss to Michigan State that night. And then Iowa State, as you mentioned, grasps victory from the jaws of defeat. It truly was a wonderful night to be sipping on a cocktail and just be a third party, knowing that my team had won earlier in the day, so it was all good for me.
Man, okay, yeah, we won that day, so that's awesome. So, yeah, great season last year, of course. We look at the schedule this year. You mentioned that they open in Ireland, Farmageddon overseas.
So
just
weird. Why are we doing
so weird?
Why? Leave the rivalry game on campus. What are we doing?
They're both getting a paycheck for it. I kind of love it. I kind of love that we're getting.
It's gonna be kooky.
One of the weirdest rivalry games in another country. This is going to be our greatest export for the year 2025 from the United States, and I'm here for it. A tricky South Dakota team. That's a tricky FCS game, as tricky as it possibly could be. They get Cyhawk at home. And then even trickier, they're going to Jonesboro, Arkansas to take on Arkansas State. I don't know who signed that contract, if they didn't read the fine print or something, but that's a weird game against a team that won 8 in the Sun Belt last year. So beware. We've, of course, seen Big 12 teams and Iowa State specifically struggle with some G5 teams in the past. But looking at the conference schedule, it feels like it could be a lot worse. It feels like they got off not completely easy, but they play Arizona State. They get them at home. That's really the only true contender that they have on the schedule other than Kansas State and Farmageddon overseas to begin the year. The rest of it's very, very manageable, especially when you look at the home road splits.
Yeah, I agree. I like the runway, especially. I feel like if they can beat Kansas State, I will go on record. I said that Iowa State would beat Iowa in Iowa City last year. Hawkeye fans did not like that. It ended up happening. Well, Hawkeye fans, you get your revenge. I'm picking the opposite this year. I'm going to take Iowa to win in Ames. So all the Cyclone fans, 3techpod@gmail.com if you want to disagree with me. But if they can start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-1, which I think is very, very possible given the schedule, then you host an interesting BYU team. We'll talk about them in the next episode. I think a lot of doubt surrounds BYU because of the Jake Retzlaff news, and they're going to have to find a new QB1. But that BYU roster, I really like. There's a lot of positives to still be picking the Cougars to win a number of games. So that'll be an interesting one. Arizona State, obviously, the job that Kenny Dillingham is doing, they get them at home. Fun spot there for the Clones to try and pick off the playoff team from the Big 12 last year. And then
big revenge spot, too, after the championship game.
Yeah, sure. Big revenge spot. TCU is, I think, a tricky road game, and that's not off a bye week. So that'll be coming off of a home game against Arizona State. Then you go to Fort Worth to take on a very explosive offense that, we'll see if they can run the ball. And then Kansas and Oklahoma State to finish it. I mean, you can certainly talk yourself into 10-2 for the Clones. There's no doubt about it.
Well, that'll do it on this edition of the 3 Technique with the meaty middle portion of the Big 12 standings as projected by you guys. Teams 6 through 10 are in the books. Go back, like I said, and listen to the Monday episode for teams 11 through 16. Mitch, in your mind, before we close it out, what have the Jimmies, how have they done so far? What do you think of the rankings so far?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I would have had a team like Iowa State. I would have had them higher in my contenders list for sure. Anytime that I think I can see 10-2 or 11-1, obviously they're going to be right there at the top. But I think it's been fun. The Arizona pick that we talked about, that's a really fun, interesting team to have up high as they did. Maybe a little bit asleep on Utah, which we'll see what that offense can do. And then, I talked about it in the last episode as well. I'm as high as I think anybody in the country maybe on the Houston Cougars, and that being high on them means maybe they get to 7-5. I'm not projecting a huge run, but I just love the roster that they put together. So, I don't think they're going to be 15th in the country, but honestly, and we say this every time, this is our second full year doing this. We've now previewed, 7 of 8 total conferences given the Power 4 back-to-back years. The Jimmies and the Joes have, the aggregate order surprises us every time. And then every time it's been, well, no, that actually made sense. We understand at the end of the year why you ended up putting that team where you did. And so It's a really fun thought experiment. Obviously, it gets the Jimmies and Joes involved in the back and forth, and the conversations that we've had with fans that have filled that out has been just a total blast. So I love the community that we're building. If you're a part of that, thank you so much for joining the Jimmies and Joes. And if you're new, consider hitting subscribe and following us on our social media. We think we're pretty fun guys, and we'd love to talk college football with you.
Absolutely. Speaking of subscribing, if you're listening to this show right now, open up the YouTube app on your phone and please do us a favor. If you're not already, go subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@3techpod. We're pushing for 1,000 subscribers, and we would really love for you to be part of that goal. That unlocks some cool stuff for us with YouTube as their payment structure and ad structure and stuff like that, just to be completely transparent. That's why we're pushing for 1,000. And you can help us be a part of that. And we'd really appreciate your support in that way. Share with a friend as well if you're enjoying these previews. If you think we're idiots and you want to share with your friends, share that too. We'll happily take either way.
It happens. That does happen.
It will happen this year. We will have some freezing cold takes, especially on a conference like the Big 12. Well, let's hit pause for there. We'll be back in your feed on Friday with the top 5 teams as ranked by you guys in the Big 12. Some really fun storylines, obviously, some really talented teams too, either building from the portal, building from recruiting, some really talented coaches as well. I'm really excited to talk about the top 5 next week. For Mitch Mason, I'm Trey Reeves. We'll see you guys next week.